gifted into donor advised funds can then be bought by other believers that want to take them out, grow them, and then re-gift them. And that's kind of what we do, is buying and selling. And we've bought a bunch of businesses ourselves. So I think there's another conversation.
Yeah, I was having a conversation with our CFO and our chief investment officers that would love to see an internal market be created for businesses. You know, regrettably, sometimes people grow these incredible businesses, right? And they get to this inflection point. It's like, hey, maybe I'm tapped out at the stewardship of this business. And maybe it's going to take the next leader to take this to this next level. Maybe it's life circumstances, maybe it's time, maybe it's a weariness, right? But sometimes we create these massive impact businesses, right? They've got great employees. When I sold to our private equity, like 1 year, I had a 2-year earnout. In my year one, they wanted me to fire half of my staff to get, better EBITDA numbers. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. And they quickly realized I wasn't going to be a yes man to them. And that's why they didn't keep my contract after my 2-year contract was up. And we were able to still get top tier earnout while I was in there. This isn't about me though. But my point is, we put great practices in my old business, and then we sold to private equity, and they want to suck everything out that really makes that a great place. It's very short-sighted. More often than not, those great things that we put into things to make a great culture, to make an impact in our community, are the very things that actually make us a profitable business that they wanted to buy to begin with. And that could be short-sighted. And so to create a marketplace so you don't lose the value, the beneficial kingdom value in a business because you sold, I think is absolutely essential. So I'm with you on that. I'd love to keep that conversation going.
Welcome to the Exceptional Companies Podcast, a podcast for purpose-led entrepreneurs looking to master the art of buying, selling, or optimizing small businesses. Your host, Chris Seegers, founder of Exceptional Companies and author of Selling Main Street, has over a decade of experience starting, buying, and leading successful businesses. He's here to guide you through the complex world of business transactions and growth. Each week, we dive deep with actionable insights, expert interviews, and real-world strategies to activate and equip you to live exceptionally and build exceptional businesses. Now, let's dive into today's episode. Here's your host, Chris Seegers.
Welcome to the Exceptional Companies Podcast, where we discuss how to buy, grow, and eventually sell your business to fulfill your personal and wealth goals. I'm your host, Chris Seegers, and I'm super excited to introduce my incredible guest, Eric Most. First of all, is a really good friend, is just a kind, wonderful human being. He's a great connector. He's also the president of National Christian Foundation Rocky Mountains. And today, the theme is giving strategies that ain't your granddaddy's. We want to talk about really like the myths behind giving and how, as faith-led entrepreneurs, we can weave giving into our life at an earlier point in time as opposed to just kind of towards the end of it. So, Eric, I'm so excited to have you, man. Welcome to the show, and really want to just kick it off with your story.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Chris. It's a joy, and just welcome to everybody else that's listening. So it's fun to be here. You know, I ran a podcast for a little while, so it's fun to be on the other side of the microphone. So hopefully it could serve you and your listeners well. A little bit about me, my family, my background, how I got into this role. I was part of an entrepreneur family. My father had started multiple businesses. The most notable was a property and casualty insurance firm that was based in Florida. And in college, I'd worked for him in high school, and I kind of vowed to never work for him again. And boy, God has a sense of humor. Every time I vow to never do something, he seems to like make that be the very thing I do. So maybe I need to exude a little bit more humility. But after college, I actually looked for a part-time job with him as I was transitioning some stuff, and realized he had a really good business, and I'd be kind of foolish to not participate in it. And so I was like, hey, Dad, can I get a job? And he said, sure. And so I kind of started as a part-time role and worked my way up. And not too long after being there, I was like, man, this is a good business. I should be a part of this longer. And so I told him like, hey, I want to maybe stick around longer, like maybe forever. And he laughed, and I started buying up ownership. So we were a large-small property casualty insurance firm based in the Tampa, Florida market. I had 5 offices, about 25 employees. And I was buying up interest with my brother. So my brother and I were buying up interest from my dad. And it became abundantly clear to me that I was unequally yoked with my brother based off of some decisions that were made and things like that. And I was not comfortable with that. And so I was kind of acting as the role of CEO of the business and decided to take the business to a liquidity event. And we ended up taking it to market. A buddy of mine had joined a large firm that was focused on M&As for the insurance industry, and he put an offer in, and I sent it to the market. And by God's grace, we sold, not to him, we sold to a private equity firm that was focused on agencies like ours, and sold that in 2015. At that time, my wife and I had already been working with the National Christian Foundation. We had what's called a donor advised fund with them. I did not know anything about asset-based giving though. And I made a gift. So we closed on 12/31, and to kind of both, try to maximize some tax strategies that I knew existed, and also to be a faithful steward of those resources that God had entrusted to us, we made a gift into our giving fund before the end of the day on 12/31, so we can kind of secure that deduction. I had a 2-year earnout, so I was still in that business, and we had some commercial real estate that we sold, and I did not really fully understand the tax strategies that existed and the benefit of asset-based giving. And so we sold some commercial real estate, and any gain that I thought we were going to have, we really didn't, because of depreciation recapture and some other stuff that I was just not the numbers guy that I maybe even am today, and I had no idea about. And so during that time, I was starting up moonlighting in the real estate world, building up a real estate business on the side because I knew I wasn't going to stay in the industry anymore. And I got to know the guys at NCF a little bit more. They knew that my wife and I loved Colorado. We had bought a house out here, and we hoped to one day land here. And I remember a distinct conversation. This guy named David Parsley in the Tampa office said, "Hey, Eric, you and your wife have a heart of generosity, the gospel, and missions, but you made a ton of giving mistakes. You love Colorado. Why don't you move out there and be our president? We're looking for a new president for the Rocky Mountain region. And why don't you tell other families not to make your same mistake?" And so by God's grace, I wasn't looking for a job. I've never worked for a nonprofit. I've never worked for anybody else, in fact. But God opened that door, and I joined the team at NCF in 2018. And by God's grace, I have seen hundreds of millions, if not actually billions of dollars, that people have been able to learn from my mistakes. And we can go into those a little bit later, and see greater kingdom impact, better tax strategies, and some maybe more faithful stewardship to resources that God's entrusted each of us to have.
I love it, man. Thanks so much for sharing. And you've been such a wonderful advocate for us as we think through that. And I want to ask a question. So we went to a conference you guys throw, and one of the things that was really shocking to me is the different giving philosophies within generations. And I think that's really important too, as you have younger entrepreneurs, folks in the middle that are doing really well, and folks that are towards the end that are like, man, I've made way more than I could ever use for me and my family. Tell us a little bit about some of the data that you, number one, tie it a little bit into your mistakes as well, or the things that you learned, but how do people think about giving within different generations, and maybe how you were programmed to think about giving?
Absolutely. NCF has also done just massive study on next gen givers. And so I think maybe even out of that came some of that data and that research. And something that I've seen, there are significant differences in how we generations think about stewardship and generosity. This is not to cast any shade on either, any of the generations that I might mention. God, I think, has used faithful, the older generation in one manner. And I think God is using this new generation in a different manner. So we just want to be clear. I'm not casting shade, but there are significant differences. The older generation, if we think about the boomer generation, they are a loyalty-driven generation. They are institutionally oriented, and oftentimes they are quiet givers. Many of them seek to give in anonymous manners. Many of them are absolutely dedicated to the nonprofits that they're literally, you can count on their check showing up year after year after year. They are faithful in their giving. And that is something that nonprofits has had the benefit of counting on for a long time. Well, in stark contrast, this next gen givers, if we think about the millennial and Gen Z generation especially, they are, and I barely come in on the cusp of that millennial generation, and so I resonate with this. They are impact driven. They are more outcome focused. They long for greater transparency, and they want to engage more personally. They are not content just mailing in a check and being good with it. They want to have impact on there. Often, we're seeing a greater comfort level with non-cash giving and creative strategies as well, which might even include impact investing. And also interesting kind of season that we sit in as well is almost this bridge generation. It's not even a generation, it's this bridge people group. And I'd say there's a bridge people group of a significant increase in the centrality of women as it relates to philanthropic leadership and charitable giving leadership. So much of this wealth that's being currently held and stewarded by the boomer generation, it is mostly male dominated in that control. Many of it is passing sometimes for just a period of time into their spouses and or their children before it really rolls down to that millennial and Gen Z. And so there is significant growth in women and their influence. And that is something that most advisors have missed. They are not talking, they're not engaged with the spouses, they're not engaged with the daughters and things like that are going to have an impact. And that's changing the landscape because women think about giving very differently than men do. And that's a good thing. I'll just be abundantly clear. That is a good thing.
Tell us a little bit about some of those differences that you've observed on kind of men versus women.
Yeah. So I think men are oftentimes more of just like, hey, this is my buddy. I know Eric. I love Eric. He's doing a good job. I trust him. I think women want a more of emotional connection than just like, oh, he's a good guy that connects, touches base with me once a year and asks for a little bit more money, or gives me a little update about what we're doing. There's a more of an emotional connection. I think men oftentimes, and this isn't to say that this is not true for everybody, but oftentimes men can be more status driven in their decision making as it relates to who they want to give to, where women are often more connected to things of the heart that really they're passionate about. Man, we need moms, we need women just as much as we need men. I'll just be able to, but they soften us. They're more emotionally connected to the organization. And so they're more even willing to champion in a whole nother level. Also, very interesting, something I've noticed is men are more inclined to want to have some kind of strings attached. They want to be more directive of the outcomes. And they're like, hey, I'm going to give you this $1 million, but I really want you to do this, this, and this with it. And I think women for more, it's like if they have an emotional connection with the cause or the organization, they're more willing to, it's not, again, this isn't saying that they're making bad judgment calls, but they're more willing to trust the individual and just kind of give with a more open hand sometimes than men are.
That's really fascinating. So because giving is not something, at least what I would call good giving, or I don't know, maybe a good mental model around giving isn't really something that's been talked about. At least I wasn't taught that. It was kind of like, all right, give your tithe and that's kind of it, and maybe help out here and there. Did you have a good mentor, or who helped you, or how did you build good mental models around giving and how it could be more integrated?
Yeah, I will say it's probably definitely a muscle that has grown over time. I'd say a huge impact in my own personal life and journey was a mentor that I never met, maybe a couple mentors that I've never met or never truly engaged with. One was a pastor named John Piper. And his influence on my life is extraordinary. His emphasis on doing all to the glory of God, 1 Corinthians 10:31, has really been a life-shaping kind of theology and methodology. So then as we seek to apply doing all to the glory of God, 1 Corinthians 10:31, that informs everything we do. It's how we work. It's why we work. It's how we give. It's how we steward the resources that have been entrusted to us. Those things are just absolutely essential. I would say then early on in my days of NCF, I had never read before, but like Randy Alcorn's book, The Treasure Principle, it seems so simple of a book, but foundationally, it is so impactful for many. I would say it's probably one of the easiest books to pick up and to start viewing yourself not as an owner of anything, but as a faithful steward. Since then, I've had some incredible friends, and by running a podcast for multiple years on this subject, I've just been able to sit at the tutelage of so many. Dana Wichterman and her husband Bill recently wrote a book, Stewards, Not Owners. And I think that that is one of the most pivotal things that we need to do. We need to understand, and I'm not trying to should you or do you, but ultimately, many of us think about the businesses that we approach as ours. We think about it as this is my wealth. This is my this. And I think that is a lie. We are called to be stewards. And when we rightly see who truly is the owner, I think that changes everything. And so there have been books along the way, like Stewards, Not Owners, I think have really helped me understand that role even better and time with the Lord and just kind of that proper position. And so if we start approaching things as a steward and not an owner, it changes everything. It changes the conversation from how much should I give away to the onus is on how much should I keep. As I'm dealing with business structures, as I'm dealing with employee issues, I'm doing these different things, it becomes a different whole paradigm. And I think it is essential for each of us that do follow Christ to understand that we are not owners. These have been things that have been entrusted to us, and we are to be a faithful steward of what God has entrusted to us.
I love that, man. So Tara and I just finished a third book, Exceptional by Design, How to Build Your Dream Life. It's going to print. I think it's really good. It's kind of like 15 years of figuring things out in business. And two things I want to touch on that we touched on in that book. One is that stewardship mindset. And whether you're a believer, someone of impact or not, my point was, if you don't believe in stewardship, the fact is we all die with nothing.
That's right.
Right. So you can believe you own something, but no matter what, you're still only stewarding to the end of your life. So, I mean, you can fight that premise, whether you think it's spiritual or not, it doesn't really matter. It's still, we all end up naked in a grave at the end of our lives. And obviously, you know, a big life after that, if you believe in the faith that we do. But the other thing too, that we've really been trying to model in our life and tell people about is just reintegration. So we had this like separationist movement that I think was largely led by separation of church and state. And then it was kind of like separation of your faith and business and separation of you from your family's farm and separate like all these hey, all these pillars in life, your faith, your family, your fitness, your finances, fun, all these became these separate things. And we've been just trying to tell people kindly and with love, hey, what's worked for us is God saying it's all one thing. Like your giving and your money and all those things, it's all integrated within your philosophy of who you are as a creator, as a follower of Jesus Christ, or if you're not, it's still the same thing. Yeah. How do we reintegrate that? So as you think about people that haven't been given good mental models on giving, Eric, how would you encourage folks to reintegrate giving as not just the money, right? Because I can't remember who came up with this philosophy, but your time, your talents, and your treasures, right? So we think about that a lot. And I think that's why younger generations actually want to give their talents. Because for me, giving you my money, Eric, that's not my biggest gift. My biggest gift is me coming in and helping your organization. That's what I'm better than most people in this entire world at, and a lot of probably your same people that you work with. And so when we really find a passion, we're like, God, man, I know God wants us to expand this. Oftentimes it is like, hey, we do want to support you financially, but here's some rocket power that God gave us. So anyways, how do you think about integrating giving into the whole philosophy around life and building a good life?
Well, I use that acronym right there. So I expand upon time, talents, and treasures to stewardship of your life. And in that, and I took this from my friend Pete Oakes, who took this from somebody else, but your labor.
Who took it from the Bible?
Yeah, I mean, nothing new under the sun, right?
Right.
But your life, how are you stewarding your life? Your labor, your influence, your finances, and your expertise. This is what I talk about on my podcast that we had for many years specifically. And I often say, out of all of these, we are probably here in the global West, probably the best stewards of our finances and most generous with that. And arguably, we're doing a terrible job, right? If you look at the stats, as a people, we give less than 3% of that which we earn away. So, but if we are the best at our giving of our finances, man, we are missing the boat. But yes, I strongly advocate for that labor, influence, finances, and expertise. And the group that's listening to this podcast, the entrepreneurial world, the business owner, leader world, the one that you absolutely have the greatest opportunities to steward and to make huge impact is that expertise. And then also, Chris, this is the other one I'd press in even more for you. I'm not saying you're not doing this, but that influence. Oftentimes we might get burned by the time that where you and I are in business, maybe we've been burned a time or two, and we start getting a little bit more scarce with some of our influence, and the impact that we can have on the connections that God has given us is astronomical. And so sometimes the very best thing we can do is actually get out of the way. So maybe it is expertise, but sometimes it's also getting out of the way and making a connection to somebody else. And that impact can literally change the world. And then where we spend our time, often our pocketbooks will follow. So if you get involved, you get passionate about a cause, you're giving them of your labor, you're giving them of your influence, your expertise. I mean, your pocketbook's going to follow, and that's a good thing.
I love it. I think too, we talk about this in the book a little bit. It's so tough because as an entrepreneur, you want to have really good habits, right? So time block, be effective, to be successful, you really need to be diligent about your time and your influence.
Yeah.
And then as a believer, you're like, oh, but where am I leaving room for the Spirit, right? And that's a tension, man. I've failed, and I'm still failing in that, of just every morning waking up, God, this is your day. How do you want me to use it? But then the default is, all right, we got.
But I have it very full.
That's right,
very full.
Yeah. So, and that's something I think you and other folks have taught me is like, all right, like the margin. Now we've got a ton of margin for our family and things. We're not overbooked. That's something that we're very important about, but also just having, I'm doing some just like, hey, we're going to have people over for dinner, 4 hours, no agenda, just hang out and just let the Spirit move. Hey, we're going to go on a men's deal, 2 days, no agenda. Like hang out, pray, think, we're not going heavy in the word. We're not let's just let the Spirit move. And I think that's been a struggle for me and probably for a lot of entrepreneurs to say, man, I'd love to use my influence, but I'm so busy. And so, yeah, I totally get that. I want to get a little more tactical. So a lot of people, including me a few years ago, my wife is brilliant. She runs her own wealth firm, Exceptional Wealth. She really is the brain behind a lot of the estate planning, tax planning. I'm like a crazy entrepreneur, strategic mind. So she came to me one day and said, hey, we really need to look into this thing called the donor advised fund and be more strategic about how we give. And really, I don't want any dollar to go to the government. The government is worst fiduciary. Try to give every dollar to something else other than the government, especially if you're a believer. They're going to give it to Planned Parenthood and other things that you just fundamentally do not agree on. So anyways, that was the thesis behind it. But she came to me and said, hey, there's this thing called the donor advised fund. Here's what it is. She probably explained it to me 4 times. I'm like, I still don't get it, but sounds great. You're brilliant. I'll follow you. But for those folks who have never talked about planned giving or understand some of the structures, what is a DAF or a donor advised fund? Just give us a little bit of a treetop there, because I think that's really important to this conversation.
Yeah, I think very simply, I describe a donor advised fund as a charitable checking and investment account. So you get charitable benefits, you get tax advantages when you make a contribution into this charitable checking and investment account, and then you're able to advise on where to invest and where to grant money to. We do live in a country with the most generous tax law there is. And I 100% agree with what you're saying. And yet very few of us, though, are actually leveraging it to the utmost. Chuck Colson, former Hatchet Man and former founder of Prison Fellowship, helped write this document called the Manhattan Declaration. And I think it's the last line in there that says, render to Caesar's what is Caesar's, but only what is Caesar's. And I think that is a tool of the donor advised fund, and what NCF, kind of where we play, is in that but only. We want to be legally, we want to do what we need to do. But as the best job that we can possibly do to maximize the available structures to create huge impacts on the things that truly are going to change the world. So think about it as simply a charitable checking account. It can have a lot of, some people just use it to simplify their charitable giving. They get one tax receipt instead of having to track down many of them. They can give anonymously if they want to. Think of it as their own private foundation, but more tax efficient than a private foundation and at almost zero cost. There's a cost, but almost zero cost compared to a private foundation. But where, I think especially NCF, where we really specialize is in the strategic non-cash giving. So you can give cash into the fund, but what's better is if you have appreciated assets giving those. So that could be as simple as an appreciated stock portfolio. If you have gains in the market, don't ever sell those and pay capital gains. You can gift those instead into this donor advised fund and get the tax benefit at that full fair market value. Avoid receiving that as income, so you don't pay any ordinary income tax on it. You don't pay any capital gains, and you're able to then grant those dollars to charity. So if you wanted to give $10,000 away to your favorite charity this year, if you used appreciated stock assets that you bought 5 years ago, effectively, if you're in a moderately high tax bracket, it's going to effectively cost you about $3,700 to give away $10,000. And that's like a no-brainer to me whatsoever. So that's kind of step one. Once you get that idea, you could use any other type of appreciated asset. So business interest, real estate interest, oil and gas rights, water rights, intellectual property. All of these things can be incredible tools of greater generosity and create legal structures of tax preferred or tax avoidance in legal structures. Like income producing real estate, we're helping a giver right now that's going to give a industrial building to NCF, and they literally get legal tax avoidance in this scenario. So they get a charitable deduction when they make the gift of their building, and then income that comes off of this goes straight into their giving fund. We pay no tax on that whatsoever, and they don't realize any of that as income. So and instead they now get to direct where to invest and where to grant those monies eventually to charity. It's just a huge leverage opportunity.
I love it, man. A question that we love to ask our potential clients is, do you know what your business is worth? And if you sold your business today, would it fulfill your personal and financial goals? If you're a successful business owner, but you don't know when or how to sell your business, and if you've ever wondered what each additional day in your business is actually costing you, we'd love to chat. If you're ready to spend more time with your family, your friends, or traveling, come sit down with our team, because when you work with exceptional business advisors, we'll help you build a blueprint to sell your business successfully and help you create, capture, and achieve your dream life. Don't wait for the right time. The time's now. Go ahead and scan the QR code or book a discovery appointment at excoadvisors.com. Okay, so for people that are thinking strategically about giving, have a heart for giving, know, hey, there's a better way to do it, but maybe they're not quite there yet. Before we launched the podcast today, you had mentioned, hey, there's kind of some like do's and don'ts. There's some groups that maybe you should still be thinking about giving. It should be part of your ethos, but maybe not to this level and maybe this. So walk us through a little bit of that journey of, hey, you're 25 years old, you've launched this HVAC company, it's doing well, but you're still a long ways from exiting. Like, how should people think about mapping that blueprint out?
Yeah, absolutely. We were riffing on this. I wrote a little white paper called Starting Generously. And I want to encourage that generosity from the beginning. One of my friends, another one of those giving mentors, I just saw him just the other day. The guy and their family have given away their entirety of their business. It's worth $1.4 billion right now, I think. And through our ownership, we mobilize about $50 million every year of charitable giving. Their effective tax rate as a business is about 6% at a $1.4 billion valued business. But this is what he would tell you. And he would say, if I didn't start from the get-go, I would never have done it here. And so from the very beginning, they set a precedent that they were going to give away 50% of the profits of the business. So 50% of the net profits of the business, they were going to give away. 50% they were going to reinvest it back into the business every year. And that first year, they didn't know if that was going to equal anything. And by God's grace, they actually gave away like $50,000. Well, that number has doubled almost every year. And to the point that in around 1997, they're looking at significant estate tax issues because of the, a taxable estate and things like that. If something happened to one of them, it was going to be major. But they viewed the business as God's from the start. They literally dedicated the business to God. They set a cap on their lifestyle. They said the fruit of the business's growth is not going to go to changing our lifestyle. We don't need to live on this crazy number. And so he actually set a cap on their income at a very modest cap. And they've been able to be super generous. And every year that number has grown and grown and grown. But it started with a commitment. And it started with a commitment that they made to his business partner, which happened to be his brother, that they were going to do that. They also then verbalized it with many of their key hires. And so they actually let their hires know that, hey, the fruit of your labor is not going to go to my bottom line impact. It's actually going to go to the changing of the world. And so we're going to take care of our team members. This gentleman, he literally was like the 65th highest paid person in his business. And he's the CEO. And so even though he capped his lifestyle, he didn't require the capping of your lifestyle. He was still, on par with paying his folks and things like that. But their story is extraordinary because from the start, they set these principles in place. And that was absolutely essential. He says, if I waited till our business was worth $1 billion and then started doing this giving journey and then started making these, I would have had so much lifestyle creep. It would never have happened. I would never have seen that opportunity. So for one thing, I would say is start early. Verbalize it with some key people that will actually help hold you accountable. And you can even codify it in your operating agreement. You could say in your hardwired in your giving into your operating agreement, saying like, we're going to give this percentage every year. And at such and such a point, when it makes sense, we're actually going to look at adding in a charitable shareholder into the business. So creating structure in the operating agreement on the front end will make life a lot easier. The number of friends that we've been able to help or have tried to help with asset-based gifts that did not have these things hardwired in their operating agreements, and maybe they had some investors come in and their investors weren't comfortable with adding a charitable shareholder and they wanted to deny it is a major factor. So if you put this in from the get-go, your negotiation power is at the strongest on the front end of a deal. Let people know that this is this is in our ethos and it's in our desire. And it's not going to impact one bit how we run this organization. If anything, it's going to propel us because we see this as a vehicle of stewardship and impact. It's going to propel us to be even more focused on being an efficient business, operating with absolute excellence. So that's something that I really emphasize on. Identifying when the right time is to make an equity gift of a business is essential. And the business needs to have real value. It needs to have a significant value base in there to make sense because you get a charitable deduction based off of the value of the asset when you make a gift. And we have folks that make as gifts as small as less than 1% of a gift. And we have folks that make gifts of 100% of the business and still they still take owner comp and all those things. We don't get involved in those type of things. So your business really needs to have value, have predictable cash flows. That's very important. There is this technical term out there that the IRS has. It's called EBH, excess business holdings. EBH, it's an issue that means how long can you hold an operating business as a nonprofit? And there is a limited time factor there. And so timing matters on when you're thinking about gifting of an asset. There are solutions to that, but there's conversations to be had. Have them with your advisors, have them with some folks like me and other offices across the country can get into that. And then I think also it's essential that there's not this need for founders to continue to reinvest in the business, have retained earnings and some things like that. That kind of marks like this is now the time to really start doing that next level of strategic giving, right? Like hopefully we've set a baseline, we're giving out of the profits, we've kind of capped our lifestyle, encourage that kind of mentality early on, some really strong, hard conversations, have some accountability, I think are all really important things.
I love that, man. So I want to key on one thing that your team has taught us, which is share the giving journey with the people around you. And that could be your employees, that could be whatever. And so we have a bunch of different businesses. One of them is Exceptional Business Advisors. We help people buy and sell businesses, and we're experts in transition exit planning. And that's why we partner up with people like y'all. But when we launched that company, I'm partners with my two brothers. We had the same conversation. We said, hey, we're going to have a percentage of our profits that we're going to give every year, no matter what it is, which is great, right? But then we said, not only that, but like we want to share that gift message with our clients, right? So we, when we sell these businesses, usually we get some pretty big checks, and it's a lot of hard work, and we help people achieve some pretty great results. But every year at the end of the year, we basically, and who we've partnered up with right now is a local rescue mission. That's a faith-based group. And why we did, some of the reason why we did it is we wanted to send an email to, let's say we sold your business, Eric. We'd say, hey, Eric, just so you know, you fed 1,000 people, right? Of your local people in your community based off of the revenue we received when you did it. And we're not doing that to like get any sort of, cool feedback from our clients, but we do want them to know, oh man, that's so cool. Like that money is now recirculating within our local community. It's serving in a way that we know these guys are good stewards of those dollars, and they're helping people. And they're people that I drive past every day to the office. And I have such a heart for folks with mental issues and homelessness issues. And I'm like, man, this, widows, orphans, homeless. It's like, hey, we're here. Let's try to work here. But I've had such great feedback from clients, and I wanted to give them that gift, right? Of like, hey, I want you to enjoy this thing. Not we give this money, and anonymous giving has a place, but I'm like, I want you to be able to enjoy that giving as well, right? Not only us and our team, and not only the person receiving it, but also you knowing, hey, somebody out there is getting a warm meal and a shower because you worked with us. And I think really like amplifying that, like you said, there's this emotional connection that I think givers generally want to say like, hey, we do want to give, but we also want to feel like, hey, there's some sort of connection there. And then I also want to talk, you and I, we need to brainstorm, because one of the guys on your team, we've talked about creating a marketplace where companies that have been gifted, and I don't know the legal piece of this, but I want to talk with your team, gifted into donor advised funds can then be bought by other believers that want to take them out, grow them, and then regift them. And that's kind of what we do, is buying and selling. And we've bought a bunch of businesses ourselves. So I think there's another conversation.
I was having a conversation with our CFO and our chief investment officers that would love to see an internal market be created for businesses. Regrettably, sometimes people grow these incredible businesses, right? And they get to this inflection point. And it's like, hey, maybe I'm tapped out at the stewardship of this business. And maybe it's going to take the next leader to take this to this next level. Maybe it's life circumstances, maybe it's time, maybe it's a weariness, right? But sometimes we create these massive impact businesses, right? They've got great employees. When I sold to our private equity, like 1 year, I had a 2-year earnout. In my year one, they wanted me to fire half of my staff to get, better EBITDA numbers. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. And they quickly realized I wasn't going to be a yes man to them. And that's why they didn't keep my contract after my 2-year contract was up. And we were able to still get top tier earnout while I was in there. This isn't about me though. But my point is, we put great practices in my old business, and then we sold to private equity, and they want to suck everything out that really makes that a great place. It's very short-sighted. More often than not, those great things that we put into things to make a great culture, to make an impact in our community, are the very things that actually make us a profitable business that they wanted to buy to begin with. And that could be short-sighted. And so to create a marketplace so you don't lose the value, the beneficial kingdom value in a business because you sold, I think is absolutely essential. So I'm with you on that. I love to keep that conversation going. I have some friends that have created some perpetual capital type of private equity investments to where their plan is we want to buy and hold solid businesses that make great impact in our communities and the lives of the people in there. And we're not just looking for an exit every 7 years, a 5 or 7 year type of cycle. And I think we need more and more of that. Some of that also comes into play with how we can steward those resources resources. And so something I just barely teased on, I said the words, but I didn't explain it at all. And that has to do with when you give into a donor advised fund, think about it as a charitable checking and investment account. What we can do is actually use those funds that are in there for kingdom impacting businesses as well. And so literally you can use that capital that you got a charitable deduction for that went into your donor advised fund and make investments in for-profit and nonprofit entities that are making a kingdom impact. And so the outcome of this, and this isn't this is getting too far over the skis for this first podcast and things like that for some folks that might just be learning about this. But literally, you can loan your own self or your friend capital, and that's charitable capital. That if their business makes some type of impact. So we can actually use charitable capital to make a perpetual fund that could actually keep sustaining businesses long term. And that's definitely something to explore.
And that's exactly where Tara and I and my partners in the family office are going. We're like, how do we think 100 years?
Yes.
And start thinking. And the reason is I did 2 private equity deals. Well, one, and my partner did one, so I guess collectively 2. And we had the same experience. I'm like, this is out of alignment with my integrity as a believer, and also just from a basic standpoint as a business owner. When you build an awesome team, and you've spent a decade putting processes in, you want to keep it going.
Yeah.
Like you've done a lot of the hard work.
Yes.
And then to sell it, and the private equity guys are going to roll it into whatever they do and do a EBITDA enterprise value smash, and then they're going to try to sell it or take it public, and eventually the thing's going to fall apart, which is my position. But there's a lot of and I have a buddy that is doing something similar who's a believer, and I said, hey man, there's an impact to what you're doing.
Yeah.
Because if you smash 4 companies together that don't have common cultures, don't have common processes, thinking, well, we can just sell it to the next group, that is going to fail at some point in time because you're not doing the basic business to actually run those collectively. Mm-hmm. And that's somebody's job, right? Yeah. That's somebody's community that now doesn't have that HVAC company. That's somebody, there's real impact to that in a negative way. And we just said, that's not what we want to build. And I think that perpetual capital is important because we always talk about the tail wagging the dog. If your fund is a 5-year fund or a 7-year fund, and you need to exit, you are going to run that business in a different way than if I'm going to run this for 50 years. And that means every decision I make has to have integrity. The way I treat my employees has to have integrity. The way we give has to have integrity. As opposed to, well, if we can keep this thing together for 5 years, sell it for $25 million, we're good, and we go buy a bass boat and goof off for 3 years. So we've been really trying to reframe, because the other thing too is if you get into the data behind exits, like 90% of people that have exited are unhappy after the exit, and it's not the dollar amount. The dollar amount is usually good. They're like, man, I didn't exit the way I wanted to, or maybe I didn't have the right structure in place. My identity, I didn't work on my identity being I'm only an entrepreneur, and now I'm trying to do other things. I think Halftime, there's a book called Halftime that talks a lot about that. That's really good, and there's a ton of resources out there. But we've been really trying to say, hey, before you get to that point, way before, let's have these conversations and really talk about, if you're a believer, hey, what would honor God and what good stewardship looks like, but also the structures around it. And really just thinking about, if you had to own this thing for 50 years, how would you run it? And let's build that thing. Because ultimately, that is going to be the thing that's the highest value, right? From a market
100%.
Perspective, that's going to be something that somebody's going to pay you a lot of money if you want to exit at some point. Yep. So I want to go a different way, because as we've been talking about, there's something that's bugging me that probably bugs a lot of people. We've got a couple camps in the Christian world and entrepreneurship world. And I'm not sure where I'm still kind of defining my philosophy, but there's a lot of this like give everything away, and right. So I believe in stewardship, but there's also kind of this like give everything away. Your kids shouldn't get anything. It's all God's. It's and there's some truth in that. And then there's a philosophy of, hey, you should leave an inheritance for your kids' kids. And honestly, I just read through all the Old Testament, and the thing that's interesting. So Jesus talks a lot about money, and the New Testament talks a lot about money. The Old Testament doesn't talk a lot about money, right? So you got these guys like Abraham, got these guys like Joseph, And they're not talking about, hey, you know, I had this new chariot and I kind of feel guilty about it. Maybe I should have given that chariot away to charity. Or, hey, I had 1 million sheep and maybe I shouldn't have had 1 million. I should have only had 100 because that's what my family needed. How do you think about that, right? That balance of like what that looks like. And I know a lot of it is individual, but what are some mental models that you've found that have been useful?
Yeah, a couple of things. Man, the joy of working with some amazing folks that have spent a lot of time thinking about this. You know, I just get to like regurgitate things that I've learned and seen and some models. You know, my friend that I mentioned that gave 100% of the now $1.4 billion company away, you know, he runs another whole group called like Kingdom Companies or something like that. And to enter it, you have to have given away your interest. And they're like looking for perpetual companies that are going to create massive value add for the next 100 years, like you've described. And so I love that. One thing that he's done is he's actually accelerated his inheritances to his kids. He would say that I don't believe that in the Proverbs where it talks about the inheritance is a financial inheritance. I actually believe that they were inherited land that they could work. So they inherited a job opportunity. And so his mentality, personally, he and his wife, their mentality has been, hey, we want to, Ron Blue says, do your giving while you're living so you know where it's going. I like to add the joy of seeing it given as well. But he's like, why would I not apply that exact same approach to my inheritance to my kids? And so he set a number that's way lower than what many of us would think of. I'll be honest, especially from a guy like that. But he says, you know, I don't want to give so much that my kids are going to get broken. I don't want to give so much that they're not going to have a good work ethic and things like that. And so he set a very modest number, and he and his wife have given that inheritance to their kids when they've been around the age of 27, based off of if they are ready or not. There's some kids, it's like, he's got a couple of kids, he's like, they're not ready for it at that point, and I don't want to be harmful to them. And so we've accelerated, and we've been abundantly clear, there is nothing else coming to you. Everything else is being given away. Just want to make sure you understand that. But mom and dad are here to help you steward this at a time that you probably need it more than any other time, right? Too many of us receive inheritances when we're 50 or 60 years old, and we don't frankly need that money. It has like no significant impact to us, right? Like maybe it is that, oh, I could go buy a second house or I could buy that boat type of thing. But it's really more impactful often when we're kind of just launching. And so I thought that's really neat. David Wills is one of our attorneys. He's the past president of NCF. He's our president emeritus. And something that he's taught and walked through a lot of families that I really appreciate as he talks about 3 different types of capital. He says there's spiritual capital, character capital, and financial capital. And as he's thinking about leaving estates and transferring wealth, he says that it is if spiritual capital and character capital are not both tested and proven solid, it is unadvisable to transfer financial capital. He also said that we can use financial capital to instill spiritual capital and character capital. And so he would encourage that Gen 1 to use their resources for Gen 2, or maybe it's Gen 3 or Gen 4 even, and say like, hey, we're gonna pay for you to go to this Young Life camp, right? Or like this, this camp, right? And not only do we want to pay for you to go, we're gonna pay for your best friend to go as well, because we want you to have solid friends that are gonna be walking this life together. That's using your financial capital to instill spiritual capital in the life of somebody. And so you can start testing it out, like, hey, we've created this fund, this legacy fund. And so that we put value as family as a value for us. And so we want there to never be a cost barrier for our family to gather together. So we have set aside this fund, and we're going to rent a beautiful place in some great spot. And we are going to gather all the family, every kid, grandkid, great-grandkid. We're going to pay for them all to fly in no matter where they are in the world, because we put value at a family level. That's using financial capital to instill character capital, maybe spiritual capital. We're going to spend this money to go on these mission trips with our kids and grandkids and different things like that. So that's something that really jumps out to me on your question.
I love that, man. And the other thing, too, that's coming through this conversation is when I've seen people do it right and when we've done it right, giving is just a joy.
100%.
And that's the other thing. If you've got wrong mental models, you're listening to this podcast and you're like, man, I am giving, but I just am not enjoying it. reach out to Eric and his team, because there's so many resources just to figure out where's the misalignment. Like, is it you're giving to somewhere maybe you shouldn't be giving? Is it you're not actually tied into it? Is it a deeper spiritual conversation where you need to give some things up to God? But Tara and I, like, as we've journeyed forward, the more we give, the more joy we get. And also, I would say, like, find an area where, you know, your talents, the needs, and the giving all are kind of at the center of that circle. Yeah. Because you talked about influence. One of the things that we do once a quarter is we buy 3 tables at a charitable place that we think is somewhere you should support. And we invite as many people as we can. And I've always told founders, I'm like, guys, look, I can cut you a check, but my biggest value to you is to get a bunch of really good people that are aligned and tell them how awesome your group is and have them have an awesome time. Yeah. And then also I'm kind of a hammer to say, hey guys, if you can, give some money. Yeah. I don't care if it's $10 or $10,000, but you're here to give money, and this is a great organization. Now, and we had a good glass of wine and a lot of fun doing it together. Right. But I think that joy of giving is so important. So let me ask you. Can
I leave you an anecdote? I know we're going long.
Yeah.
So one of our givers, he's open with a story, so I can share. His name's Clyde Lear. He owned Learfield Communication. They did the largest college sports broadcasting company. And Clyde, I had him at an event, and I think he was about 80, 82, and he's talking, and he goes, Eric, there's like this runner's high, you know about this, and maybe I don't look like it, but I'm like, yeah, I know about this runner's high, you get those endorphins. He goes, yeah, you know what? I think there's a giver's high. And he turns to his wife and he starts cracking up and he goes, there is a giver's high. And he's just like, the joy that this guy has is incredible. And so just definitely want to encourage that. Like, there is great joy in generosity, and that's not just in our money. That is in that whole life stewardship.
I love it, man. So that's a great way to close. And I want to close with, one final question. Outside of NCF, and you mentioned some books, so we may just need to tag some more of those, but what's one tool, book, resource, recent, that you're like, man, this was a game changer in my generosity or giving journey, and I want to share it with our listeners?
2 books, one I already mentioned, and that would be Stewards, Not Owners by Dana and Bill Wichterman. That would be the first one. The second one, very new, is a book by Robin John, who is one of the co-founders of Eventide, and it's called The Good Investor. Far too many of us, I believe, myself even included, regrettably, historically, I'm working on making changes. Our public investment portfolios are misaligned with our values, and they are actively working against us. And that should not be. And we fortunately live in a day that we have more options for kind of faith-aligned, faith-driven investments and just great investments out there. And Robin John's book on A Good Investor, I think, is a really great just came out this past year, great resource for folks.
I love it. Eric, thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom on giving and entrepreneurship. And we'll definitely have to do it again and do a more tactical one on maybe DAFs or structures, but really appreciate you being on the show, brother.
It was such a joy. I can't believe that we've already chunked through 50 minutes. And so blessings to all those listening. My encouragement would be to you to get in the game. Look for one practical aspect that you can, something that you could put into place today. And I'm grateful that you're here, Chris, you and Tara, and the influence that you guys have and that you're stewarding and that you're sharing with others. So just grateful for the partnership and friendship.
I love it, Eric. And Eric, to close, where can people find you? Where's the best way to connect with you if they're like, hey, I love what he's saying, I want to get to know more?
Yeah, so ncfgiving.com is our website. I'm the president of the Rocky Mountain region, so /Rocky Mountains. You can find me on LinkedIn pretty easily as well. And I might not be the fastest at responding to LinkedIn, but those would be probably the easiest ways to get a hold of me.
I love it, man. Well, appreciate you, and we'll see you on down the road.
Sounds good. Blessings to you.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Exceptional Companies Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or via RSS so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes. Or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. If you liked this show, please reach out through our website, www.excoadvisors.com, for free tools to order a copy of Selling Main Street, or to sign up for our free webinar on how to sell your Main Street business.